Hello and welcome back to Bestseller Books. I am your host, Cynthia Johnson, and I am joined today by Barry Conchie, author of The Five Talents That Really Matter: How Great Leaders Drive Extraordinary Performance. Barry is the founder and president of Conchie Associates. He's an expert in psychometric talent assessments, leadership research and development, team building, and succession planning. Barry consults with the company boards, CEOs, and leadership of leading organizations across the globe. He is coming to us live from Boulder, Colorado. Welcome, Barry.
Good to see you, Cynthia.
Good to see you. Uh, you have so much data. I have to say that's the I'm the book, your history. You have I think the number I got was 58,000 executives that you've run assessments on. Is that true?
Yeah, it's probably closer to about 61,000 now, but yeah, within the context of the book, we have leadership data on over 58,000 C-suite executives from predominantly larger companies around the world.
58,000 executives do exist. Um, what were some of the surprising like discoveries from your research?
Um, well, the research set out to find something, and the something we were looking for was the answer to the question about what characteristics are most predictive of leadership success. So as you think about the successful outcomes leaders achieve, could we predict the psychological characteristics that enabled us to be pretty confident that one leader was going to succeed and another leader wasn't? We did find that, so I guess we weren't surprised by that. But some of the things that we were surprised about, a lot of companies place high emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion, for example. They want the leadership of their companies to be a more effective representation of their own companies, the societies that they lead, the customers that they serve. And what we found was that although women leaders tend to be stronger than the men we have in leadership positions within our database, they're not very good at sponsoring other women behind them. So they climb the ladder, break through the glass ceiling, and then pull the ladder up behind them. That was a surprise. We thought women would be much better sponsors of other women leaders. The other issue that we were surprised by is that the women that did succeed in top-level leadership positions tended to mirror the characteristics, traits, and dispositions that are typically associated with male leaders. So they tended to be more outspoken, they tended to be more direct, more assertive. And we didn't expect to find that, but we definitely did.
You didn't happen to find out why, did you?
Well, we obviously find these things and then we ask that question. So why does this occur? So on the first question about why women leaders are more likely to pull the ladder up behind them, I think it's more of a focus for male leaders to address a disparity that is seen as their responsibility. And therefore, they do take it extremely seriously. We're not sure women leaders attach the same significance to that issue because, well, quite clearly they've made it, so why can't other women? So that probably is one of the answers to the first issue. But with regards to the second issue, and this is why, why do women who are successful in leadership roles exhibit typically male characteristics? I think that's a reflection of a more broader limitation on executive leadership around action orientation and drive and hard work and determination. It's not that those characteristics aren't desirable, it's that they are a rather narrow view of the perspectives that might make a great leader. And so if women show those characteristics, if men show those characteristics, they tend to be highly valued characteristics. It's that they're not the only characteristics that will predict success.
Was there it sounds like it was pretty consistent in your findings across the board that would be the case?
Well, the statistician in me would say beware of overlapping bell curves. So we're not saying that all women are like this, all men are like that, or only these characteristics were evident. It's that the weighing of the evidence placed a priority in these characteristics over other characteristics. So it's not that all women who succeed have got essentially male characteristics or exhibit those characteristics, but more of them did than didn't.
So interesting. As a woman, I think back and I guess you put it into is you present the information or the data, and I've seen it myself. So it sounds, it's like this intuition meets the science is always a good thing. Uh, what are I know in the book you talk about these like four core talent dimensions of leadership. Can you speak to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah, so there are a constellation of talents. There are five of them, and these were the ones that are most important in predicting effective leadership. I'll just run through them quickly. So the first is setting direction, and this is about plotting a course for the future. If you've got a directionless leader, not clear about their goals and objectives, not very many people are going to line up behind them and say, I'm with you. So we need a clear sense of direction. So that's about, what value you're trying to create, other goals and objectives that you're setting, the kinds of goals that would make me proud to achieve, and so on. The second aspect is around harnessing energy. Now that might mean the energy of the leader, it might be the energy of the organization, but you've got to motivate people, you've got to mobilize people, you've got to give people a sense of achievement. People have got to be able to drive towards tangible outcomes. So you've got to be able to harness all that energy and put controls in place to ensure you get the best outcomes. The third element is exerting pressure. Leadership isn't always easy. People aren't always going to agree with you. That means you've sometimes got to change people's minds. If people say, no, I don't want to go there, but it is definitely the right place to go, you need to be able to exert pressure in a way that ensures that people understand the argument you present and then believe it and then are prepared to follow. And that might mean they have to change their mind. The fourth element is around building connectivity. We get things done through people. Although there are leaders out there who rip open their shirt to reveal the Superman vest beneath, very few are successful doing that. You need people around you. So that means you got to build the right connective tissue across the organization. We still see too many organizations dealing with silos and trenches and parts of their organizations not working effectively together. Well, this assessment predicts the capacity of a leader to build the kinds of bridges that break those silos down. And then the fifth element is about controlling traffic. And we use the analogy of an air traffic controller. This is a very heavily rules-based function, but you've got to deal with unpredictability in the moment. And that's pretty much what leaders need to do to ensure effective execution. Now, it's not that any one leader is going to be brilliant in those five areas, but they better manage those five areas. And if they aren't strong themselves in all those five areas, they'd better build a team around them that can fulfill those kinds of expectations, because those are the five elements that are most predictive of the highest performing leadership.
I think about the five areas. They appear both, again, obvious yet complex, meaning that seeing someone who can do all of these things effectively is a lot, because setting direction and then not wanting to get on the path yourself is a hard thing to do. And I mean, did any of this research show, back to the bell curve, like outstanding leaders who somehow were able to excel in all of these areas, or was it really more varying between person to person, just a couple of them?
The outstanding leaders manage all the areas, but they don't have to excel in all the areas. And I guess this takes the pressure off. Personally, I'm not that good at building connectivity. I don't connect well with people. I'm not someone who's a social butterfly. I keep myself to myself. I'd better manage that. I'd better make sure that my aversion towards relationship building doesn't get in the way of my effectiveness. And that's what we found with the highest performing leaders. They are definitely not good at everything. I think that's a good thing. And nor should they try to be good at everything. We shouldn't be beating up otherwise brilliant leaders by telling them that they're deficient in some areas and they need to become expert, because that's nonsense. Nobody can do that, but you've got to manage it. So that means when you make selection decisions about who to appoint on your team, you'd better make those selection decisions cognizant of the areas where you struggle, because if you bring people in who are brilliant in the areas where you are not, then between you, you've got a tremendous upside to you working effectively together. The problem is that if there's one dominant finding in the psychology of human selection, it's that people pick people like themselves. The lesson of the book is to not do that. Now, when you ask leaders, do you pick people like yourself? They all say, oh, no, I don't do that. And of course, then we come along and measure them, and it's as though we found a remote village in western Nebraska. No, where everybody is very closely related, they've all got the same kinds of attributes. So everybody knows the right answer to the question, but few people show a lot of intelligence in addressing the deficiencies that could limit their leadership overall.
It comes to mind where the executives at Google talked about being stuck in an airport with someone and making sure you can stand being around that person. I'm curious if these 5 categories, there's clearly you need a lot of self-awareness to understand what to fill for. But if you don't excel in certain areas, does that mean you're also maybe not really drawn to that kind of person naturally? Meaning, would you want to hang out with someone who's really connected and social butterfly when you're not?
Well, it's actually more demanding than that. One of the subliminal biases that afflicts human selection is a characteristic of likability. And if we like a person, we tend to attribute higher standards of expectations and their likelihood of achieving them. Now, there's no evidence for that. But if we like a person, we think they can do more things than they're actually capable of. So it's a problem. And what we try to do in the book is to make people aware that likability is not necessarily a positive thing. And we even go so far as to say that it might be advantageous to appoint people to your team that you actively dislike. You might not have a relational rapport with them, but they could be brilliant for you because of the different way in which their mind works. They could see things that you don't see. You don't have to like a person to be able to derive that benefit. But for too many people, they stick to this, in our view, fallacious idea that likability is really, really important. And they use highly biased language like, I don't know, chemistry, right? You hear executives say, well, I need to feel a chemistry with a person. That's a shorthand for overt bias. That means I like some people and I don't like other people. It's not a very good basis for challenging the judgments you reach about people. So we argue for a scientific basis for assessing people, and then for challenging leaders' predispositions and biases, and to encourage them to appoint people who are a good balance for their capabilities and don't just replicate what they've got.
The likability piece is does that correlate with women? I'm just making an assumption as a woman. Maybe there's a piece of that. And if that was in your findings, it would be very interesting to understand.
Not necessarily. I think likability is, it's difficult to apply a generalized rule on this because what we find is that relationally compliant people tend to get promoted at higher levels than people who are more challenging and direct in the way that they work with people. I don't think being easy to manage is necessarily a good characteristic, although many managers would argue against that. I sometimes look at some of the top executives we've worked with and studied. They were a darned handful to manage earlier in their career. And I half smile when I say that, because I'm kind of glad about that. I don't want people to be pushovers. I don't want people just to go along with the crowd. I want people to stand their ground. If they think something's wrong, I want them to speak up. And if people aren't listening to them, speak up a bit louder and a bit more persistently. Now, none of those characteristics people would see as necessarily desirable, but I would see them as being essential. It prevents groupthink. It prevents just going along with the crowd. I want teams challenging the heck out of each other. I want them arguing about the issues. And I want them doing that from a position of real insight and knowledge, not just because they're trying to fit in with everybody else.
Mm. So if I were a hiring manager inside of a company, and I have to hire for a leader, not hiring a leader, but hiring for a leader, right? Then how could I apply the lessons in this book to make better decisions?
We'll start with the leader that you're hiring for. Does that leader have a good sense of self? Does their self-assessment match reality? Now, I always tell leaders that, we all have a strong sense of self. We might call this our ego. There's a view of ourselves that we hold to be true. And then there is a view that everybody else has of us. And the gap between those two positions is called delusion. And we need to make that gap as narrow as possible. So our self-perception and the external perception is one and the same. Start there. Are we describing ourselves the right way? If we are, then we have a better chance of picking somebody who's going to be a good complement to my capabilities. And I'm not pretending to be good at what I'm not. And that means that when I look at another candidate and I see capabilities that are very different than mine, this could be additive to our team or additive to our relationship.
And then when hiring for a leader, right, you can't replace the entire team to fit the leader. So you have it is how could, in recruitment, can we look at these 5, talents that really matter and then seek the most appropriate leader for the position?
Well, take a step back and look at a different question first. And that is, all of this conversation that you and I are having now fits into broader consideration around succession planning. And too many organizations have got a poor process for thinking through succession planning. And they want to do it really quickly. They think it's a pretty quick fix. We think a proper succession plan is an 8-year journey. So from when you start working with us, and as we start really improving the talent levels in the organization, we think it's about a 5 to an 8-year journey. So start there. And now let's get back to this particular problem. We can't change everybody on the team. It's neither, I don't think it's desirable to do that for all manner of reasons, but it's also largely impossible. So what you commit to is making sure that every single change you do make is a significant upgrade on what you had before. And in order to help leaders do that, we use our assessment that we talk about in the book to try to check your biases and to make sure that you're focusing on the right issues that truly elevate the talent on your team. Now, there is another issue, and this is a fascinating question when you ask leaders this issue, because if you say to leaders, do you pick people for your team who are stronger than you are? Everybody says yes. Of course I do. Yes, I have people on my team that are stronger than I am. Nonsense. It's a very, very rare occurrence. So when we analyze leaders and their teams, it's very rare we find strong players on the team. But we've got to change that. We've got to make it okay to hire people who are way stronger than the leaders. And if we can do that, and we can show the evidence that we're doing that, then we're driving succession planning, because we've got more people who are capable of stepping up in the future than is currently the place right now. So that all occurs within the context of a 5 to 8 year journey. So you fight the war with the army that you've got, but that doesn't mean you can't change it and upgrade it while the battle rages.
5 to 8 year journey of succession planning. And that, I mean, I can just from experience, I can see that the hiring, you think you're hiring someone better than you. I would say better because you're hiring for the thing to fill the gap, but it sounds like what you've found, what I'm hearing is that strength is self-awareness. Like is self-awareness a key component for leadership?
It's one of the key components, because without self-awareness, you really don't know what you're dealing with at all. And if you don't have high levels of self-awareness, then people are fooling themselves most of the time, and they spend the rest of their time trying to fool other people. I don't think that's the right way to look at this at all. But beyond self-awareness, you actually need to be talented.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
it isn't just self-awareness. I mean, I know some people who aren't very good leaders, but are extremely self-aware. Right? But so self-awareness is important, but it's non-predictive in and of itself. I think what you have to recognize is that excellent leadership is rare.
Mm.
And this is what most people get wrong. So there are too many people out there that think leadership is something that you can grow, that you can develop, that, give me the raw material and I'll turn them into a great leader. That is so much nonsense. It's just difficult to know where to start. So if we look at our assessment data out of 58,000 leaders, 4% of those leaders operate the top scoring quartile in our database. 4%. 4% of leaders are in the top scoring quartile of our assessment database. That's the nature of the challenge. So exceptional leadership is extremely rare. It is not the norm. So when we look at self-awareness as one of the prerequisites, it's the lowest starting point that you could look for. The hard work is still ahead, because we need to find leaders who've got sufficient evidence within these 5 dimensions to be able to be effective as an overall leader. It's a tough challenge.
4%.
Yep.
That is that
48,
is
48%, Cynthia, are in the bottom quartile.
wow.
That's nearly half of all leaders that we've studied are in the bottom scoring quartile in our database. That's the nature of the challenge.
Wow. I'm a little bit in shock because I'm thinking, how can we find better leaders if the leaders leading the future leaders are not identifying them properly because they themselves are not the right like the perfect or the highest performing.
Well, one of the fun things about our work are the numbers of brilliant leaders we find in organizations that organizations don't even know exist. And this is great for us. So we will go into a company and we might assess the top 3 levels of leadership. That might be, I don't know, 200, 500, 2,000 leaders. We assess these people. And then we go back to the leaders and we talk through what we've found. We nearly always find brilliant leaders that organization knows nothing about. Hiding in plain sight. They're usually being kept down by a rather inferior leader above them. Nobody knows about them. Nobody talks about them. They're not on any succession planning lists because they're managed by an inadequate boss who feels threatened by their talent. And so, they never get talked about. And then we come along, we cast a light on them and say, well, what about this person here in this organization? Top leadership say, oh, I never heard about them at all. Why are you asking us about them? And then we'll explain, well, we found some fantastic leadership talent here, and I'm surprised you folks don't know about them. And then they dig in a bit deeper. And then once they get under the skin of their organization and get into the depths of the organization, they start hearing fantastic things and say, oh, actually, a lot of people really like these people, but why didn't we know about it? And there's nearly always an embarrassed leader sat on top of this individual who's been suppressing them for years. We call them blockers, and every organization has got them, and they tend to be older, white, male. That's the characteristic of a blocker, an older, white male.
Have you identified the talents that they all have in common, these blockers? Because is like, are there ways to identify them as a leader?
Sure, they do
Yeah.
very badly on our leadership assessment. We
So take
identify
those, you identify
very
them.
quickly. Yeah, they're
Okay.
very mediocre. They don't show up very well on the five talents that really matter. But I tell you what, they do very well. And they manage the politics of the organization exceptionally well. They manage their bosses extremely well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand that. Is there a way, or one of the five, or one of the five talents that you see more of, and then maybe one or two that you see less of in the scoring? So,
We do. So to the point I made earlier, we see the harnessing energy talent elevated in lots of leaders and many organizations. And that's where the kind of energy, the drive, the determination, the grit, call it whatever you will, that's where most of that comes from. And we tend to see far less on the strategy side, the part that deals with thoughtfulness, the idea of seeking for broader options before we decide what to do. And that mirrors inherent biases that we generally see in leaders, which is a bias for action. Let's get something done. Let's make movement. It's the human need to be busy and productive. But that tends us to drive action before we've thought things through fully. So what we often advise leadership teams to do is to look at that imbalance. So if you've got an overdeveloped sense of drive and determination, then have you got enough really good thinkers around you? Because it looks like most of your organization is driving a fast car with no steering wheel. And when that happens, we really do lose control quickly on these sharp corners that we don't anticipate. So we do see a bias for action being dominant in most leadership teams. That's not necessarily a good thing.
no, I again, seeing or working with organizations, having gone through acquisitions and mergers myself, I notice exactly what you're saying. It's this intuition, which I think, again, this is not science, but I do think people recognize it faster than we can get to the actual data sometimes. Um, can anyone take your test? I know everyone can read the book, and we'd love to know where to get the book. Like, can we also take the test? Like, how would someone engage you? Because it's very interesting. There are a million and one questions that we could go through. And I'm sure it would just be great to figure out where we can get more of this.
Well, we wrote the book to share our research with the world. We thought we'd got enough in our database to be able to share some compelling findings. And the book is the story of the assessment. So how did we build it? What did we find? What does it predict? So, anybody who wants to know more, start by reading the book. And you can either find a link on our website, or it's available through Amazon, the usual outlets. But then we decided we have this assessment, why don't we share it with the world too? And so we're offering the opportunity for people to take this assessment, and it's an online assessment. It's pretty scalable, pretty easy to take. The details for that are on our website. So conchie.com, so conchre.com. You go to our website. You can sign up and take that assessment. What that assessment will do is give you an idea about where you stand in our database. So a few minutes ago, I said to you, 4% of our database scores in the top quartile, and 48% scores in the bottom quartile. So one of the questions that might be on your mind is, I wonder where I am. Well, you can now find out, and we will tell you. And depending on which option you choose, my colleague Sarah Dalton's more than happy to spend 45 minutes on the phone going through the results with you. So if you want really detailed analysis, you can have that option too. But at least you're going to find out where you are. And then you'll get some guides. We'll tell you, based on your results, here are some recommendations we would give you. But here's the thing we want everybody to be prepared for. Not everybody's cut out to be a top leader. Now, what happens if you really want to be a top leader and the results come back and say, we don't think you should be? We're going to tell you. And we're going to try to help you. But not everybody can get to the top of the house. And, possibly for the first time in your career, you'll be given honest feedback. We're not going to sugarcoat it. We're not going to say one thing when we really mean another. If the results come back and we don't think you should be a top-level leader, we're going to tell you. We might at the same time say, however, you might think that, your talents are suited for leadership. We don't agree, but we do think you could be highly effective over here or highly effective over there. That, to me, will be a fantastic service to people. There is no point promoting people to top-performing leadership positions that don't have the talent to succeed. There's no point. And I just wish organizations would stop lying to people by pretending that they can.
And glamorizing.
And glamorizing it. You see, here's the other thing, Cynthia. About 80% of leaders and managers shouldn't be in the job. They just shouldn't. And the evidence for that is, if you look at global measures of employee engagement, only about 20% of employees believe they're being managed by somebody who positively drives their engagement at work. It means 80% of managers are not fit for the job, right? Costs billions of dollars of lost productivity. Think about the people who are sick of the organization, who don't want to commit because they've been atrociously managed by a manager. Think about the amount of stress those managers induce in their direct reports, stress that those employees take home and inflict on their families for free. Think about that for a second. Just think about the psychological damage being done to people. Now, in the book, in an article also we wrote recently, I asked this question. Have you ever been taught by a teacher who can't teach? Now, when I think back to my school days, my hand shoots up. I was absolutely taught by a teacher who can't teach. They should never have been put in the job. I feel exactly the same way about managers and leaders. If you're occupying that role and you're one of the 80% who shouldn't be there, you're probably inflicting misery on other people. And by the way, you're probably not very happy yourself. What better objective could we have than finding the job that just speaks to you, that gives you a sense of fulfillment, of success, of enjoyment? But it might not be leadership and management, and that should be okay.
I absolutely agree with that statement. And there is a glamorizing of upward mobility and leadership and more responsibility. And there's this that we look down upon someone who goes the opposite direction, even if their happiness goes up. And it absolutely shouldn't be the case. I know brilliant people who said, no, management is not for me, and are doing just fine. They love their life. They made the hard choice to not become a manager and still remain very good at something. I think that's what we should all strive for. And brilliant book. I'm going to take the test, even though kind of an idea of what it's going to say, but I will take the test. And I also encourage, all of our listeners to do the same. We'll leave the link in the show notes. And yeah, it was really amazing speaking with you and learning more about this process in the book. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Been a pleasure, Cynthia, and hopefully we get the message out there. Nothing would make me happier than each individual person out there finding the job that fits them like a glove. And it doesn't have to be leadership and management. And, if you can find your sweet spot and it doesn't involve climbing the corporate ladder, but you can still be phenomenally successful, you're going to find that I'm your biggest cheerleader, without a doubt.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining another episode of Bestseller Books. I'm your host, Cynthia Johnson, and we will see you again next time.